Candace for this afternoon's panel. My name is Chris Dickie. I am the Director of Strategic Priorities with Research New Brunswick, and I'll be moderating today's discussion. And the title of our discussion today is Sovereign Energy Data, the Missing Infrastructure for AI-Ready Electrification. So just a little bit about how we're going to run this afternoon. This isn't meant to be a presentation, this is meant to be a discussion. So I really am looking to the audience here for you guys to step into the conversation. I've got obviously questions prepared that will be passing along to the panelists here, but as you've got questions, start waving your hands and very happily pick you guys out and get you up to the microphone. So without further ado, I'll introduce our panelists for today. So sitting next to me is Paul Vallee, CEO of Tehama. Next to Paul is Greg Robart, CEO of SGIN. Next to Greg is Candace Pollack, CEO of Research New Brunswick. She's my boss, so be nice. And at the end here, last but not least, is Donna Curtis Maillet, Privacy Officer and Research Associate from DataNB. So we're going to start off here. We're going to go down the line. I'm going to give each of the panelists a couple of minutes to introduce themselves, talk about their background, where they come from, and then to touch on the theme of the panel here. And once we've gone down the line, we'll start in with some questions. Paul?
All right, me first. Hello, everyone. Thank you for being here. My name is Paul Vallee. My professional role is as CEO of a tech company called Tehama, where we build a data enclave as a service. And that's not on topic for my comments today. So if you're interested in data enclaves, scan my QR code, which hopefully Aaron will put up on the screen, and you can reach out to me about that another time. More on topic for today, I serve as Senior Fellow at CG, which is the Center for International Governance Innovation, is a think tank based in Waterloo. And I'm also a founding member of the Digital Governance Council of Canada, which is our national standard-setting organization for matters of digital governance. At the DGC, I'm a member of the AI Ethics Advisory Panel, and I contributed to the foundational national standard on data sovereignty. So I'm a voting drafter on that standard. And so I particularly care about that. Part 8 of the National Framework on Data Governance is the framework on national sovereignty for data. And that's the context for my remarks. Canada is entering one of the largest infrastructure challenges in our modern history, and it will all run on grid data. It will all run on electricity, but electricity is no longer atoms flowing down copper, okay? Electricity is data. And the grid data movement is no longer a niche conversation. Grid data and the systems built on top of grid data will become the operating system of the Canadian economy. So we're managing massive challenges. We're decarbonizing existing grids. You've all noticed that. We're electrifying transport. Obviously, electric cars are rolling out, but not even only just cars. We're electrifying heating, even here in the north, with heat pump rollouts continuing apace everywhere. And we're supporting the explosive growth of data centers. And you've seen that some of these data center investments are simultaneously incredibly strategic for Canada and also incredibly controversial. So we have to navigate that in a way that maintains public trust. And underneath all of this is data. We often, and we've heard, talk about AI in energy as though the intelligence layer is the hard part. But it's not the hard part. It's actually the easy part. The hard part is building an underlying data ecosystem that is trustworthy, interoperable, and sovereign. When our data is fragmented, stale, or commercially siloed, systems will produce flawed conclusions, but more importantly, we will disable our opportunity to govern and then innovate on the basis of our own national competitiveness. So one key insight stands out. Sovereignty is agency. As a nation, we care about our own national agency to make our own decisions, to make things better without anyone else's consent and in our sole judgment of what better means. That same sovereign movement matters organizationally, and it matters for entrepreneurs who are looking for the opportunity to innovate with reasonable rules for their agency. Many of our energy systems lack these structures and protections. A utility may control its grid while remaining dependent on foreign cloud providers. A province may have generation assets but lack sovereignty over the analytical modeling for demand, and local innovators might have brilliant ideas but zero practical access to the underlying data required to build their businesses. And that's where we face a risk and an opportunity. The risk is that we accidentally create feudalism in the energy sector, closed ecosystems and vendor lock-in and innovation controlled by giga-businesses, or even worse, foreign multinational giga-businesses. But the opportunity is much more exciting. So here's a vision. If Canada can establish trusted frameworks for governed and permissioned energy data, we can unlock a massive innovation system, and we're early enough to this conversation to even be global leaders. Local innovators can participate safely in the energy transition without requiring every participant to become a compliance expert from scratch. So in that way, good governance and governance innovation is the opposite of bureaucracy. Good governance becomes what enables high-trust participation at scale, including decentralized, which means including right here in Fredericton. Ultimately, Canada's electrification future will not be determined by how much power we consume. It will not be determined by how much power we generate or even how green that power is. That's exactly backwards. Our electrification future, including our consumption, generation, and how green it all is, will be determined by whether Canadians can trust the systems making those decisions about our power and whether Canadian stakeholders retain meaningful access and sovereign agency over the data that shapes that future. Thanks.
I'm going to get your opening notes later. Can I get a copy of those? Thanks, Paul. Hi, my name is Greg Robart. I'm the CEO of an organization called Smart Grid Innovation Network. UNB, NB Power, Siemens were one of our co-founders back in 2016, I guess it is. We've morphed into an organization that has a vision of clean electricity for all Canadians. And we pay attention to the infrastructure and are fully aware that with all of the infrastructure we're building comes this digital layer that has a lack of standards, has a lack of access. Unlike the electricity and the poles and wires, that's all standardized and from a safety perspective, that's the easy part. The digital is the hard part. And I want to paint a picture a little bit about the size of the opportunity here. For those of you that watched the announcement 3 weeks ago now, I guess, our Prime Minister announced that Canada is on a path to build 2 times the infrastructure and need 2 times the electricity that we have today. And just so you guys get a handle on what that means, between now and 2050, to meet that, we would have to build 8 Point Lepreau's, our nuclear plant, per year. And open one of those per year across Canada to meet that 2 times capacity. I'm not saying we should do this all with nuclear. That's not what I'm saying. I'm just trying to paint a picture of how big this is. What that means is, if we're going to make these targets, we have to make faster decisions. We need better data. We have to leverage the AI tools that are here now. And the worst thing we could do is use AI on bad data. So we're going to get bad answers. And right now, the way the sector is designed is the data is kept by, for the most part, our utilities, but also vendors who've done a really great job at not letting data out. That is our personal data, our energy data. They've done a great job with a few exceptions. It does happen. It's still an issue. If we want to speed this up, we need to get the data into more people's hands. And I was speaking to an a friend of mine at break earlier this morning. And he worked for a company here in New Brunswick that did software development for an energy efficient product for buildings. And he told me their development cycle for their product took 50% of the time was to find data. So if you can imagine, that's one company, a small company in New Brunswick, multiply that by the hundreds, if not thousands across Canada, working in the same energy space. They're all begging for someone to help solve this data problem in a safe and sovereign way. So I want to paint a little bit of context for the energy sector and why this is such an important topic. And with that, I will turn it over.
Good afternoon, everyone. As Chris mentioned, I am his boss, but I'm not judging his performance on this panel. My name's Candace. I'm the CEO at ResearchNB. For those of you who aren't familiar with ResearchNB, we're the province's research funding agency. So we have a mandate from the government of New Brunswick to fund research and innovation across our province through our public sector institutions like universities and colleges and nonprofit research institutes. Energy is one of our core priority sectors, but you'll find, given that I'm certainly not an expert, my remarks might be a bit broader today. What I will share is beyond funding research and innovation, our mandate goes larger than that because we really believe that there's an immense value to the research and innovation that happens here in New Brunswick. So we're very much focused on how we support growth of research and innovation in New Brunswick and how we build partnerships, how we connect people and infrastructure and equipment here to drive investment into research and innovation in our province. We feel strongly that integrated data sets is critical, not just in the energy sector, but actually across all of our priority sectors. That's the core of our value proposition as a province. And whether it's to industry, whether it's to the federal government, whether it's to international partners, having that strong, linkable data set that Donna will talk about, not me, is really, 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 really important to what we need to do to build the future of our research and innovation ecosystem here. With that being said, I think both Paul and Greg gave a great intro where they talked a little bit about, I think, your respective visions for the future. And I won't speak to my vision for the future, but I might just call out some tensions that I think underlie the comments that you made that are worth noting in how we approach a solution. And the first is the concept of sovereignty. And I'm a little bit of a nerd on this. I am by background a lawyer. I did my training as a legal professional. I did study, I focused a lot on international law, so I actually focused a fair bit on sovereignty as it emerged as a legal principle. And, we went from a place where sovereignty was everything to a world in 1939-ish, where we realized that actually we shouldn't be able to make all of our own decisions in a closed room without meeting some high-level global standards. I won't go too deep into that, but and then we sort of shifted gears for many decades and focused on a global economy and how we integrate across a global economy. I think we're in a point in time right now where that globalization, that principle of globalization, that principle of sovereignty are again coming into friction given what's happening in our geopolitical context. And I think that's really important to the way that we look at this conversation around energy data and sovereign energy data, because Paul, you sort of rightly mentioned we don't want to create this feudal system where different data sets exist within Canada, but the same could be argued at an international level. So I think that's something that we should be thinking about. The other piece, Greg, you mentioned sort of we need to go fast, we need better data, we need to get rid of the bureaucracy is sort of what I heard there. But I think, again, as it relates to data and particularly AI and applying AI to data, we do need to be cautious of how we proceed. And we do need to think critically and strategically and intentionally and also take the time to learn how we're using these tools to our advantage. And so I agree with you wholeheartedly that we need to go faster and agree with you wholeheartedly that we need sovereign Canadian data. I just think that those are really good fundamental tensions for us to keep in mind as we think about what the future looks like.
Wow. Holy cow. These are very humbling experiences when you sit up here because, everybody in the room has such amazing perspectives, and then CEO, privacy officer, sitting on the end. But anyway, so I am a privacy officer, and I'm a privacy officer at DataNB here on campus. And we are a research data center, and we are actually defined as such in the New Brunswick provincial legislation. And what that means is we have authority to hold very large personal and personal health information data sets. And that is what we do. But there's a lot more to it than that. We actually hold this data in a very, it's called a trusted research environment, and the data is held in a pseudonymous or a de-identified form. We actually can't even receive it if it's identified. It has to be received in a de-identified form. But because of legislation and some changes to the legislation in 2019 and 2017, we are able to match. And what I mean by that is we're able to link data across multiple data sets at what we call the line level or the individual level. And that is our superpower. And that is a legal authority to do that. And so what it means is you could take Donna's data, not know it's Donna, and link my education data with my health data. And so you can see the value in that, how much more robust your research can be. So we also have many strict and very strong governance. And that's what I really, and so Paul and I are good bookends here, because that's what we do. Governance is the main piece. So, and I don't mean governance where we make a bunch of policies and we say, this is how we do it. No, I mean governance through the entire data life cycle, from how we collect the data to how we are going to use and access. There's whole approvals, you don't just, get access to the data. You have an approval process, there's review processes, how the data is disclosed and shared. So we have very strong governance around that. So when researchers use our facility or research is done there, the results don't come out at line level. They come out in aggregate form. So we, percentiles and, groups and things like that. So the risk of re-identification is reduced. So, and that's the beauty of what we do. And what I wanted to say with respect to AI is that these kind of practices are the same things we need to transfer over, and it was said here about the data being so core. We have to have AI governance. We have to have really strong practices through the entire AI process. So whether you are a developer, a deployer, or a user, you should be embracing governance through the entire process. And that means asking strong questions. And I'm breaking it right down to simple things here, but I'm saying, asking the question, what is this for? Why this product? Why this particular AI? And then who's accountable for it? And it might be a committee, it might be a team, it might be one person, but in the end, somebody needs to be accountable for that and how that rolls out. And then what are the risks? Measuring the risks. And I know, I'm breaking this down very small here, but then what are the mitigations if you're going to go forward? The decisions are made. And some of the talks earlier were just fantastic. They were talking about documenting, these really core principles around governance that often get missed. And I think that, to me, is one of the biggest things as we move forward. And unfortunately, we need to have it in strong legislation. The legislation is lacking. I don't know about you guys, but I'm really excited to get home and see what the strategy is. AI for all, I think it's called. That's what I saw. I want to read it. We are so lacking in Canada around data privacy and strong AI legislation. And my last little comment is there are great frameworks and examples already out there that we can embrace. So the EU AI Act, the GDPR over in Europe. These are models we can follow. Quebec has changed their legislation in the last few years. It's quite strong, closest to GDPR. We have infrastructure through the digital, through the work that you do, the digital standards. We have these capacities to participate and be part of it. We have great examples, and we need to embrace them.
All right, well, I think we can pretty much end the panel there. I'm not going to compete with opening statements that fantastic. So many different threads to pull on coming through that, but it sounds fundamentally like this is a conversation about data. We're talking about AI, we're talking about sovereignty, but if you're listening to the news right now, there are all sorts of announcements around the investments that we're making in the infrastructure, the physical infrastructure, and I'm just wondering, if we build the infrastructure and we invest in the infrastructure, are we at a place with the status of the data, whether we're talking about here in New Brunswick or nationally, where that's actually usable infrastructure? It sounds, just based on your comments, Donna, and comments all the way down the panel, that the data is there, but is it accessible? Is it usable? Does the policy environment allow it to be accessed? So should the focus right now be on one or the other? Do we do it concurrently and hope that it works out? I'd be just curious thoughts in terms of where the priority really should be right now.
I'll try that one. So I'll paint a story and then I'll tell you where we're at. So we're trying to launch, Smart Grid Innovation Network has launched the concept of an energy data trust, very similar to what we have in healthcare. And actually we partnered with Data New Brunswick as one of our founding partners. And the idea is this, just like in healthcare, I don't know if you guys all know, but all your tests when you go to the hospital get shared with product manufacturers, anonymized, so they can make better health products. Whether it's equipment or drugs, et cetera, et cetera. It's done at aggregation, it's done at individual level. It's all safe, and these guys are one of the nodes that look after it. We don't have such a thing in the energy space. Doesn't exist. So right now, if you're a product manufacturer and you want to develop a new energy product, you have to go utility by utility or data source by data source to get access to the data. And believe it or not, there's 141 utilities in Canada. So you would have to do this 141 times. There are no data standards. So when you get the data, it's not going to be in the format you want. If your product interconnects with another product, there's no interoperability standards. And I'm only telling you this story because everything I'm talking about has absolutely nothing to do with the data center or actually the data. It's all policy. It's all what are the rules, what are the standards, and I think that's where the work has to start. The policies are set by politicians and legislation. Where it gets really tricky in Canada is we're provincially regulated for energy like we are with health. So the federal government can't own it for the nation. Every province has to get involved. I would say from the energy perspective, we're a decade behind where we are in healthcare, in the data world, and by extension, in the AI world.
So Paul, I would have something to add to that. It's a thought experiment. Let's imagine you're a student right here at UNB and you're in this school and you're studying AI and you have an idea. So this came up this morning in an ideation session in preparation for this panel. And you might like this too. So the idea is you're going to build a software app that is going to integrate with Home Assistant and all of the Home Assistant metering, little mini meters, which are really just like smart devices you plug into your wall and then you plug in your fridge into that and it will tell you how much your fridge is consuming, okay? And you want to build an app that integrates that with the smart grid data provided by those 141 utilities. And you want the individual person who owns the house and therefore owns the fridge and therefore owns the supply of electricity to consent in exchange for the utility of the app to be able to, in aggregate, offer this, what people are actually using electricity for, back to the grids as knowledge for their planning and forecasting. That's a cool idea. You can all make money with that. Go right ahead. You can't. You can't. That innovator's idea cannot be made because those 141 entities all would have to individually consent with you. And good luck even getting a meeting with 10 of them. Okay? So there is a real opportunity, but it's going to take the force of will to actually innovate and then build this ecosystem in such a way that as an individual homeowner, do I have access to my smart grid data from the utilities themselves? And can I then, because it's my data, it's my consumption, can I then relicense that to this entrepreneur's app, which they will inevitably sell to that smart grid competitor? And we do not have anywhere near the organizational demand or capability to build this. And it will take, I don't know, it will take you 5 years of hard work if you're successful to achieve the underlying infrastructure necessary for those kinds of visions to come true.
I feel like I'm just going to keep calling out underlying tensions. But I actually I think it's really important that we spend like 75% of our time understanding the problem. So I think, we'll come to a solution at the end. What I wanted to say, Greg, you said the issue is a policy issue. And I think you're right. But ultimately, change can happen in two ways. Change happens top down or it happens bottom up. And so you gave an example of the challenges with top-down change, and you gave an example of, what we could do if perhaps by chance we managed to make bottom-up change happen. And I think there's actually, I would say issues and advantages of either approach. So when we think about policy change and we say, well, we really need to see policy change so that we can collect standardized, integrated, interoperable data, absolutely. Guess what? It takes about 5 years to make a policy change, and by the time it's done, we'll be behind. And that's a reality of how the legislative cycle works, how policy change works. Policy change is not a fast process. It is a slow process. And much as we do there's a lot of talk about policy innovation and being able to move that process to be faster, there are lots of important checks and balances in the way that we change policy for many very valid reasons. So I think that's, one issue of the challenge on the bottom-up approach. I would say, yeah, we can't get 141 energy utilities into a room together, but maybe we should. Like, maybe we should be able to do that. We have a really hard time being able to really create incentives for collaboration. We all say we want to collaborate. We often collaborate, but we usually actually just collaborate with the people we've already collaborated with. And I fully agree with you that it would be really, 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 really hard to get 141 utilities into a room together. But maybe we should think about trying.
I think it comes back to the idea of trust too, and I think that's the missing piece. I think that this is where, and I'm going to keep coming back to data privacy, but there are already 10 fair information principles that are out there, and they can transfer perfectly over to the AI, and it's, accountability, openness, consent. These are all, this is ingrained in us. Minimum collection, limiting use. All of those things are there. So we can, and I agree, I think that there's going to have to be an element of legislation, regulation that's going to have to be there for all sectors, regardless, because we've been having, DataNB has been having conversations with yourself. We've had conversations in the fisheries and with agriculture, and it gets so far, and then it's just disjointed. There's so many players, there's so many parts, and that ability, and we don't do it willy-nilly. Like, we actually have data sharing agreements that these are legally, to protect everybody, to protect the group that's providing the data custodian, to protect ourselves as stewards, to protect the data, whom the data subjects, like, kind of thing. So when you're entering into those agreements, if you've got 144 parties in an agreement, it's never going to happen. So we do have to start somewhere, and and maybe it's starting with standards. Maybe it's starting with best practices that can evolve into legislation and into regulation.
I actually think the easier way to start would be to start with privacy law reform. And you mentioned GDPR, and I like the GDPR. It's okay. I like the California Privacy Initiative. It's okay. But I find that it still feels about data about me as an asset that can be owned by someone else without me even receiving a license to make use of it myself. If you think about your healthcare data in Ontario, you do have access to your healthcare data. You can get access to your healthcare records. But there is no rule saying that it has to be easy. There's no rule saying that it has to be easily authenticated. So that entrepreneur at UNB who wants to build an app has no hope of going to Life Labs, even with you click the button and downloading your chart or your test results, or going to the hospital and integrating your test results from Life Labs with your healthcare data. We're nowhere in that direction. And the reason is that our privacy law, we think it's fancy, this whole click a button for consent. Who cares how many times you click that button in a day? You're over it. I'm over it. And I care about it a lot, and I'm over it. So you're all over it. I know you are. That's not the right that matters the most. The right is back to, do I have the power to do something with data about me? Can I enable a local entrepreneur, or whether it's a small university student or a larger company? Can I download an app and then access my data about me as if it was mine? Because it's not really Google's. It's my private data about me. And privacy reform sets a path that re-enables the individual data depositor to have an ongoing access license to data about themselves. And if we did that, whether it was for healthcare or smart grid data, or a lot of the other data that you research in your research institution, now you would be able to have a direct relationship with someone that opts into your research program, and by opting in, you could acquire the license to interact with all of that data horizontally, including your data integration workloads. So I think there is a I know the FERC-NERC-CIP organized all of North America's utilities on the mission of critical infrastructure cybersecurity. And we managed to roll out a standard that applies to all of them. But you're not going to get access to all of their data that way. They're very jealously guarding access to their data. Privacy law reform, because it starts with the individual data depositor, is a great, I think, path to unlocking that vision.
I'm just going to do a quick check-in with the audience. If there's anybody that has any questions or comments related to anything we've heard to this point, love to open it up.
There's one under the light.
It's like looking into the sun, honestly. I've got to squint here. Yeah. Yes, go ahead.
Hi, my name is Mozammel Hussain. I'm a graduate student. I'm doing my PhD and my focus is on responsible AI. So especially data. So you just mentioned laws and obviously you're probably mentioning terms and conditions that nobody reads. And that is the traditional way to put all those. It's okay, we will collect your data, we will share your data, especially in social media environment. Nobody reads that, but they are collecting data. Do you think this traditional way of receiving consent through this long, text-heavy, lengthy kind of terms and condition is a good way, or should we think about any alternative way?
Yes. Yeah, there's things that can be done. So this comes back to transparency and it comes back to building trust. And I think that there's really important things if we want to bring it back to AI. There's the models that we can say what an AI app is doing, everything about an AI app. But those are great, but your average person still isn't going to read it. Like, how many people have ever read the Netflix one? I love when that comes out because I just wait, honey, I'm reading. Because it's just silliness. But there are ways, like we can do things like, they call it like the ingredients menu. So you have really high level. So what am I going to do? Like a summary, really, really high level. What's going to happen to my data is going to be sold to somebody else. Like just those really high pieces. And then from there, if you want more information, if you have more concerns, it has to be transparent. You click on that, and then you get all the legal, you get the details. But plain language, using icons, there are ways to communicate. We just don't make use of them. Like it's so much easier. And I think it's because we're so scared when we're writing up these things that we might miss something. And we're so worried that we might somehow make ourselves liable and not have disclosed all the information, that we don't make use of common sense. And I agree. I think we can do better. Absolutely. Yeah.
Can I comment?
Yeah. I'd like to chime in on your question specifically about consent and is it good? And I think consent is good. The issue is not with your consent. Obviously, we want your consent to participate. The issue is what you get in return. Okay? So when you give your consent, when you click OK, what do you get in return? You get to read this web page. Whoop-de-doo. What I want is you to have something in exchange for your consent, like a receipt. The fact that we have this right to be forgotten, but we don't know who has acquired data about us, so what? So what if I can make somebody delete data about me if I know that they have it? I've never received a receipt in exchange for this accept button. So I have no inventory of who knows what about me in order to make judicious decisions or use the UNB Students app that purges and revokes that consent from from organizations I don't trust. In the absence of a receipt, consent becomes meaningless. And the other thing we should receive, and this alludes to something, my previous topic, and is part of my work with CG, the other thing we should receive in exchange for our consent to acquire data about us is the ability to use that data ourselves without any further permission from them. And that would allow you, like all the data that Amazon and Google and Facebook have acquired about you, that would allow you to build your own app. You can vibe code your own app about that data. Or you could do whatever you want. You could integrate that data to speak about, the Life Labs healthcare data integration opportunity. But consent in exchange for almost nothing has turned into creating giant economic foreign multinational hegemonies that are essentially data-walled gardens and depriving Canadians of our local, regional entrepreneurship opportunity as a result.
I just add on to that. I'm sorry if I missed your question the first time, if I wasn't on the right angle there, but there is actually in Europe data altruism, and this is this whole movement trying to get people to be willing to share their data, and just exactly like sort of the way you're saying it, to raise, as we grow up, we willingly share our data as an altruistic way of thinking, which kind of blows my mind, but we'll watch Europe and see what they do first.
Can I make a comment? Yeah. So in my research, what I find is that I'm considering only Canadians. So 30% of Canadians who has tertiary education, they don't actually ability to read and reason what is there. So that is a problem. And there is, you mentioned icons. So actually that is in the GDPR that we can use it, but it's not widely acceptable or nobody uses. Fortunately, at UNB, we are doing a research that uses icons to tell users that, okay, this is what we are going to do. Well, this is how we collect, this is how we use, process, share. So we're still in the process, but our understanding, traditional terms and conditions with this legal wording is not working. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much. Anybody else in the audience have a comment or question? Luke.
Yeah, apologies. Donna, you had mentioned that there were multiple sectors looking at data warehousing, access, and informed decision making. What are the common threads, barriers, and how do we enable that to happen here?
I can give you an example from agriculture. So one of the things with agriculture is how the data is actually collected. If it's collected, we learned when we were working with a partner that if it's collected on the tractors, who owns the tractor IT? So then it turns out that it's actually not the farmer with her tractor. It's actually the company who facilitates the IT the GPS while they're going around through the acreage. So even though that farmer wants to share their data, they don't own the data. So then it gets into this other layer, and there's these layers and layers and layers. And honestly, if I bought a tractor, it would never occur to me that I didn't own the data from my own tractor, right? So, and these are the things, these little hidden pieces, and I'm sure it's the same with energy. These little pieces keep coming out, and I think that's one of the things, and maybe this is where, coming back to the whole policy and legislation pieces, that the transparency has to be there. If there's data collection happening, who owns it? The data subjects own their data. And I will always say that, if it's about me, I own it. And so if it's about my farm, I should own the data. But you can tell why the companies probably want that. that data, then they can build better apps, they can build better rate and sell it back to the farmers so that the farmers need to know what they, for their information for growing. So I think that's it, is all these hidden little pieces and the lack of transparency.
Just to pick up on that, I discovered the other day there's actually a company in Alberta called Ursus that is building dumb tractors and exactly servicing that pain point with farmers right now. The move towards digital agriculture is pretty significant, but a huge part of the tension in that industry has been exactly around that data ownership and access piece. And people are just starting to get fed up spending the money on assets like that sort of data that they can't access. So just thought I'd throw it in. It was really kind of interesting thing that I found yesterday.
It's awesome, but the better vision, I think, is if I buy instrumentation for that tractor, if I install it all myself, then that data is obviously mine. But if I partner with John Deere and buy a tractor, I should still have access to my data about me. The data about me should still be mine, right? And maybe John Deere does get a license to aggregate it and build products. But the idea that it becomes a walled garden and that I can't access it myself and I can't download an app and consent for a product that I want that was built locally to be created, that's what upsets me the most.
Anybody else looking for the mic? Yes.
I'm fascinated in the consent-based idea because I couldn't possibly agree more. I tried to build something actually for my father, a healthcare, and he's a lawyer, who knows the healthcare system well, but to try to get that access to that data, yeah, it's virtually impossible. So I'm interested, is there a country that you think is an example out there? There's some really advanced ones. Certainly in Estonia is the one that always kind of comes to mind when it comes to data. But is there an example of a country out there that's doing it right, where you could have access to your data, could have the consent that we could follow and use as a model, I guess, that Canada can actually follow and learn from?
So I'll go two ways. In Canada, Ontario has passed legislation that does exactly what we're talking about. So our meter data, Ontarians' meter data, is under their control. They get to decide which companies can use their data to develop products as the individual person. That's now in legislation. The utilities must share. Where the policy is a little weak is the standards in how. So it's very difficult for the companies to get access to the data in a consistent manner. It's the only province in Canada that has that I'm aware of. Around the world in the energy space, the UK, Japan, Australia, missing a couple, Germany, all have energy data trusts. So they've all solved this problem. The most interesting for me is the EU now has a continental data trust. So if you think of that in a North American context, your mind just kind of explodes. But can you imagine a place where data is consistently shared with the same rules and policies amongst countries from one end of the continent to the other? That would be pretty impressive. There are examples.
Okay, I got just to follow up on the example. Do you believe we have the conditions in Canada? You have a prime minister who gets it. You use the word hegemons, which is the right word, I'd say, in this case, in sovereignty. Do you think we have the conditions in the country right now at this moment to carry it through, to finally get something done? Healthcare, energy, take your pick.
It's tough because the conditions are set by our Constitution, and the federal government only has certain, like the authority is in the provinces for good reason. I'm not saying that's the wrong thing. I'm just saying what we're talking about here gets challenging in our constitutional construct.
Yeah.
I think the will is there. The how is the hard part.
I think I would say, I mentioned change happens top down or bottom up, and ultimately I think you actually do need both. And so, yes, we need to make policy change and we need to make legislative changes, and we certainly need to put the person at the center of those changes and say that this is this is the owner of data. We also need to be able to work better together and to find ways to collaborate toward a common goal and a common vision. So if you ask me if the conditions are in place today, I would say the conditions are in place every day. It's just a question of whether or not we're willing to take advantage of them and to stick to it and to prioritize one path forward and to get everybody on board that same path and to invest in it till we get to the finish line. That's, I think, the bigger challenge.
Actually, I'll give you an example. So the provinces are responsible for the healthcare data in the territories as well. And so when we're doing research work, we often want to do multi-regional research work, right? You want to have, especially like Atlantic Canada or something like that. We cannot share data across the provincial borders. We're not permitted, okay? There is nothing in legislation that says we can't do that. There's a lack of political will. And so we have come up with ways, and I'm really think privacy-enhancing technologies, small cells, ways of masking, these different distributed analysis, federated learning. There's methods that we've found solutions would be almost, it gives you the same results. But we've had all these workarounds because of lack of political will. And so I think that ties in exactly with what you're saying.
Yeah, here. Political will is the biggest problem. Yeah. And it's because political will comes with political price. And if you remember how our government has recently backed down on the idea that these foreign data aggregators need to pay back into Canada but you'll remember just how easily they were able to lobby to overcome that. And you'll also, the ones that were not overcome, you still can't share news on Facebook in Canada because of the same thing where they just refuse to participate. Now imagine some politician agrees with you and I, and thank you, because that's really rewarding for me. Imagine some politician agrees that data about you deserve an ongoing electronic license to that data, and that you can now wield that data to your own benefit by giving it to others if necessary. What do you think Google would say? Would they love that we're trying, because I am trying. I'm trying to dismantle a foreign multinational's abuse of data about Canadians by creating a new privacy right, which is that not just the right to be forgotten, but the right to use data about yourself. So that would mean the UNB entrepreneur can now compete with Google data. I think they're going to go to war against that. It's a nice vision, but the political will is the enabling requirement to make it happen, because they will be extremely upset if we were to try to make that vision for our society real.
Yeah, I guess that's the core of my question, is you have a more astutely and acutely aware federal government for sure, and probably more aligned provinces that we've ever had. Is are we actually going to get that moment? I'm hopeful, by the way, but realistic at the same time.
Thank you very much. Anybody else?
To what extent do you think price of energy is going to drive public policy? I've got ratepayer in New Brunswick. My residential rates are going up 19% 2 years in a row. I don't know if it's going to hit. Do you think there could be enough political pressure to start to address it if the price starts to become unaffordable? It's current way to regulate or deliver.
So for those in the back, the question is about the price of energy and the potential influence.
The one country that I've witnessed is the best on these data trusts would be Germany. Germany has very expensive energy. But the Fraunhofer Institute, which I'm sure a lot of you know, is one of our founding partners for our Energy Data Trust. And they're bringing to the table the data trusts that they've built in automotive, in forestry, in all of the other sectors. And from their perspective, it's an efficiency play. So it keeps the costs low. It makes work go faster. It makes the infrastructure more reliant, more like all of those things, those buzzwords we use here. Good access to data is part of the solution, including keeping the prices low.
And the other dimension to that, because this is smart grid talk, really, the other dimension to that is really a smart grid innovation is what also will allow you to take control of what you spend on electricity by investing in your own solar, possibly selling solar back into the grid. All of that is, infrastructural capacity that we know that we want. And the opportunity, I think, for us is to not, we don't want more googly business models in electricity in Canada. We know we're going to double the overall workload. We know these data centers are going to get built. We know we're all going to buy a lot more solar. We know our next car will be an electric car, right? And so what we want is we want to at least see this transition happen in a way that benefits our society over the longer term. And I may not be able to get the, privacy law reform that I think, many of you say, oh, that's a nice idea, Paul. That's awesome. But we may not be able to get that, but we don't even have to ever go there for grid data. We can build it from scratch from here because we haven't made those mistakes yet. We're early enough to the game. The other question that came up is what country has an example of privacy data like this? And unfortunately, that's great for Canada. I've been advocating for this. We have an opportunity to lead in our privacy reform. There is no country that I know of where citizen data about citizens is explicitly either owned or mandatorily relicensed to that citizen, which I don't really care which for what it's worth. The best we have is right to be forgotten style, but even the right to be forgotten jurisdictions like Europe and California don't give you a receipt. So we actually have an opportunity to lead.
Question from the floor.
Hey, how are you? Aaron, professor here at UNB. I really like the idea about consent back data for the people. I'm kind of curious about a couple of things about that. So if that were to come to be, what are your opinions on obligations about the data that's given back? So it kind of makes it sound like you just click, okay, yeah, share back, right? But the data may be in really messy all over the place. So would that mean that these companies have obligations to sanitize, clean, certain uptimes, they have to collect certain data? Do you have opinions about any of that? And then the other one, I guess, is do you have an opinion about where the sort of division between data and then insight from data arrives? So raw data, right? But then features extracted from data. Is that still data that we have a right to? Model weights from data trained on those features. Is that still data that we have a right to? Do you have any thoughts on where that division is?
So I'm at the stage where I drew the owl with circles, and you're talking about the rest of the owl. You guys have ever seen that picture? You're right to think about these details, and I've been thinking about them as well. And one example that didn't come up of the complexities is, do you remember when Facebook used to have the ability to consent to third-party apps about your data and the privacy disaster that emerged from that, including the Cambridge Analytica data acquisition scandal? The fact is, one of the challenges is that we may not, as a society, all be responsible enough to have access to private data about us. And that's where and you're better at listing the 9 criteria for provenance and consent and all that than I can possibly hope to be. So I want to prompt you to share them. But that's where it gets messy, because as an aggregate, we care about empowerment and agency, but as a society, we're easily duped and tricked. And it would be possible to launch a campaign to dupe enough of us to create harm back to society. So there are complexities around the data integrity itself. There's also the possibility that if they vend their data through APIs that are available to the general public, that they would be vulnerable to denial of service attacks through those APIs, or abuse attacks, even by individuals who abuse their access to that. So there are a variety of unsolved problems in that direction. But here's the cool part. At least for grid data, bringing it back to the mission for the room right now, at least for grid data, we have an opportunity to start from a pretty blank slate about this, and it really just takes a bit of force of will.
There is actually 2 of the FAIR principles. One is accuracy. That is that we're accountable for accuracy, and the other is that people have the right to challenge. So both of those could be transferred. But I agree, then are we saying that folks can't take care of themselves, right? If we deny them, it's that's the thing. And as far as then we're crossing into ethics, right? You know, so there's what you're asking are really, really important questions, and those are the kind of questions that need to be asked. So,
One thing I'll just pick on your insights versus data line. The purest of the data trusts separates those two clean. And because the minute you cross that boundary, you become another Google. You become the keeper of the data that can provide the insights that then provide you value that you didn't offer up to anybody else in the ecosystem, which is the purest of a trust. They offer the data up for others to find the insights that they can monetize, that they can deal with, or it's personal, whatever the case may be. But the data access is kept in the, I would say, the safe sovereign space. The insights, the product development are separated.
I forgot to answer that part of the question, which is my proposal is really just the data you provided, not the derivative data, and certainly not the aggregated derivative data, where your data is combined with other licensed data sources that you would not have naturally had access to. But I do think that the actual data you provided, it would be nice if you had access to a receipt for that and the ability to delete it so that your right to be forgotten becomes real. In the absence of a receipt, your right to be forgotten is an illusion. Any of you ever claimed it? Zero. It's an illusion. If you had a receipt, you could download a UNB Students app that would say purge assholes, and you'd click purge assholes, okay? But you don't have that right really, because in the absence of receipt, you can't do anything with that right. It's an illusion.
Anybody else? Oh, a follow-up. Yep.
That's a different question.
Sounds good.
Actually. Oh, wow, that is quite loud. So just thinking about the smart grid and the data that you want to collect from that and do things with that hopefully will benefit people. How do we get people themselves on board with that? Because if you look here in New Brunswick, there's a lot of distrust around that project and what's going on with it, and the fact that power bills have been going crazy. So I guess my question is, how do you get to a point where people actually want you to have that data rather than feeling like you're not going to use it fairly, even though you have the best of intentions, just because they don't trust the institution anymore?
Well, that's not us. Like, we're not the grid, right? No, I mean,
We're an independent not-for-profit that isn't NB Power or isn't any one of the 141 utilities. I think the point is the data is being collected now already, whether it's the utility or your fridge manufacturer or your home controller or your smart thermostat. The data is being collected. The issue is it's being used for their individual benefit, not yours. That's the issue. And what we're trying to do is, and I'm not saying they're out there nefarious or doing bad things. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying there's a whole bunch of value we could unlock as a society if we brought that all together in a safe, trusted manner, so that small businesses could get better access to it. So that when we're making a policy decision, we make it with all the data, not just a subset of it. You know, there's a whole list of things that goes on when you start to find a way to get access to this data in a more holistic manner than individual components.
can I just add really quickly too, when you enter into a data sharing agreement, so when this data was shared with someone in that kind of situation, you can set parameters around it. It's in the agreement, so you can say who it can be disclosed to. So if you really felt that it shouldn't be disclosed to a certain type of group or a certain interest or whatever, you can put those parameters on it. So it makes it, I mean, like the governance, then but that's our job, right? So we have to govern it. But there are mechanisms that are in place. So.
Has it been contemplated that if said data, say you opt in,
just for the people in the other room and for the TV recording.
has it been contemplated that, or is it even an option that if someone opts into using the data, is there an option that if this data gets used to generate profit, there's an option to collect a royalty on that?
contemplated, should be done, haven't solved it yet. But the answer is yes. If it's your data and there's a financial agreement that the user of the data and you can entertain it, of course money should be exchanged. It's your data, it's you.
And like even on a public scale, like, you know, a public entity, if it's generating data from the public and it's providing that data to a business who is then taking that data and generating profit from it, we should benefit.
Exactly.
Yeah, but don't overestimate how much money that would be. If you think of oh yeah, sure, data is the new uranium and all of that. But the reality is, if you spend $1,000 a year on electricity, your electricity consumption data might be worth a couple bucks a year.
Yeah, the tricky part about it is us as individual data contributors, that the value for our individual data isn't much. It's the aggregate that where it starts to get worth money. So it's the collective. The individual piece, not so much.
But like with respect to your personal health information, I want to be very clear that that goes through research ethics. And you balance the risk of not disclosing that data with the public interest. And so you have to go back and forth with that. So if it's a study, you know, and it's going to benefit 2 people and it's going to have access to massive amounts of data, well then, you know, there's a high risk there for with little benefit to the public. So that's all part of the whole thing. And the for-profit business, that's not what we're in when we're talking about data and B data. It is the public asset. It belongs to the people of New Brunswick. The data we hold in, like, as a steward and a data custodian. So it's not about profit. That's not where, I just want to be very clear that that's, and all those checks and balances are in place before anyone gets access to the data and before it's even disclosed as a research product.
I think we maybe are forgetting just how much data an individual person generates. Every single thing you do is a data point for yourself or for someone else. And so, you know, from the moment you open your eyes in the morning, the, you know, time you set your alarm clock on your phone for, the number of steps you take in a day, how long you spent reading a particular email from a particular company, which one actually went right to trash and didn't get read, which, you know, what healthcare system you interacted with, how much time you spent on the road. Every last bit of that is a piece of data about you. To what extent do you yourself care about that piece of data? I think that's a bit of a critical challenge when we think about the person owning their own data. And I don't disagree with that concept. I just think that when we think about enabling and empowering people to own every piece of their own data, and then if you stretch that further and think about monetizing it, one, you're correct, that data is not valuable in and of itself. It's valuable in aggregate. It's the trends, it's the what can we tell by an overall consumer within XYZ group at this given point in time that makes it a valuable piece of data. And then the other part of it is, you may ask me to, you know, I get an email from whatever company I want to buy clothes from, and they might ask me to consent to, you know, kind of sharing my data with them when I go onto their website. And I'm not going to think twice about it because I don't really care how much you know about what I like, what clothes I like to buy. And so to what extent, when we sort of enable people and empower people to own their own data and to decide who has access to their own data, are we also focusing in on educating them about the impacts of that company having their data or that public system having their data, or, and how valuable really is that data? Do we understand that? Does it matter if Fitbit knows how many average steps a person should be taking in a day? I don't know. I actually don't know the answer to that. So if we think about consent frameworks and we think about everyday people and the way that they do or do not choose to consent to sharing data, ultimately we have to ask ourselves, to what extent do we value that data that's being generated about us in the first place?
Another question.
It's not a question. I just wanted to share 2 statistics with you, since you said there is a lot of money to be made, can be made from data. So there is a study one of the US university did. and they found that in 2023, 6 social media companies, they made 23 billion, and their data actually came from their users from 6 to 12. So they made 23 billions. And then there is one other thing. In Europe, Facebook is free in North America, no problem. But in Europe, they put one thing there, that you have to agree to share your data with us. If you consent, if you say agree, it is free for you. But if you say no, then you have to pay the monthly subscription fee. So, and that one came from European Union. They have to actually have a public statement on that one, that they are investigating on that one. So just wanted to make sure.
Thank you
Thanks.
very much. Anybody have a comment on that comment?
Just one useful way to think about it is that the value of the data about you is a percentage of what you spend in a year. So what you spend in a year that you spend on rent or real estate, you could probably take that out. So now it's a percentage of your other non-real estate spending in a year. So it's a percentage of your grocery spending, and it's a percentage of your spending on clothes, and it's a percentage of your, but there is no magical way to make money about data about you that isn't a proportion of what you're actually spending on stuff. And so, you know, I would estimate that the maximum aggregate value of the data about any given one of you is a low single-digit percentage of your annual income.
Question from the floor.
Yeah, I just wanted to turn the conversation a little different direction, not about modern mega data centers. And it's my understanding, and the electricity needed to drive those, the economics around it. My understanding is that in Canada, that's quite difficult to do, that there's maybe a couple places, Manitoba, Quebec, with hydro that could really do this, and there's a bunch of reasons which I'm hoping some of you may know about. Do we have a solution for this? Can we truly have sovereign data stores in Canada, or are they all going to end up in Texas and Mexico and hot places like this, which seems to defy the physics, but that's where they're going.
Greg, this is sounding a lot like a you question.
Paul's grabbing the mic.
Well, okay. I just read something interesting today, and I invite you to reference it. Apparently, something like 90% of the planned data center investments in Canada are in Alberta. And I think that's sad, because it's an example of, you know, it would be better for Canada if those were distributed more evenly. But interestingly enough, this is going to require some innovation. I think Canada is in a lot of ways, an ideal place to put a data center, because cooling is inherently cheaper in the north. That's also why they want to put data centers in space, is because apparently there's easy ways to shed heat as well in space. That surprised me. I thought you couldn't shed heat in a vacuum, but no, it's not true. You can, apparently. And all this to say that data centers' costs have a lot to do with cooling and electricity access. And so we do have some advantages here to have our own data centers. We also have the advantage of a very pugnacious policy from our government to invest in regional compute and regional data centers here in Canada. Did you want to add to that? You probably have more.
Yeah, I think this is another one of those politician questions, and Alberta has aggressively said years ago, bring it on, open for business, bring the data centers on. We'll build the grid to support it. Regrettably, their grid is not the cleanest in Canada. And as a Clean Electricity Association, we're advocates for put the data centers where you have the surplus of clean electricity, or build out more surplus of clean electricity. And what's interesting, when I mentioned the number of 2 times capacity that we need to grow out by 2050, that was before the AI bubble, we'll say, started being realized. So the number is actually probably more like 3, just so you guys get a sense for the volume we're talking about. So where we put it, they're not all going to fit in Alberta. They got to go in other places.
So maybe that's a good opportunity to bring it back towards that energy-centric conversation. I mean, it's in the title here. We've been talking about data. There are a lot of different rabbit holes. I think we could spend a lot more time going down here. But, you know, and as a layperson sitting here with people that know a lot more about this than I do, there's an awful lot swirling. And when I look at New Brunswick, you know, I look at DAIR, I look at the value proposition related to DAIR as a centralizer for linkable population-level data sets. At Research New Brunswick, as Candace said, we don't necessarily, you know, deal exactly in this space, but we've got a larger vision around what does available jurisdictional scale data mean in terms of that value proposition. So we've just had a really good question that brings the energy grid and availability of energy in general to the question here. So if we circle back to what this data means, and you know, we've covered a lot of ground in terms of some of the issues inherent around how we access it, who owns it, the policies that are required. But what is the opportunity for New Brunswick in all of this? And I know, Paul, you bring a national perspective to it, but I can't help but think the opportunity for New Brunswick may well be national in scale if we act as a bit of a jurisdiction that is willing to be that living lab and bring all these things together. And so again, energy data is great, but if we can overlay energy data with what we know about education and healthcare and the environment and you know, how we generate electricity. So I know this is a very long, rambling question, and I think there's a question in here somewhere. What would the vision be? What is the opportunity? What's the value proposition here? And is it real?
I think the value proposition depends on who you're selling it to. And so, you know, I would say, yes, there's an opportunity without question. We have unique legislation, as Donna mentioned, that enables a research data custodian to exist. We have a number of data sets within that research data custodian, and we have an opportunity to put more quality data sets within that research data custodian, and then to leverage that full comprehensive linkable data set for New Brunswick to create some variation of a digital twin, depending on what industry we're talking about, depending on whether it's a government that needs to look at a problem, whether it's a private sector partner that needs to look at a problem and say, you know what, we have enough data here, we have enough data across every sector that you can actually look at a problem, come up with a solution, and test your intervention digitally without ever taking a step in the real world, and make New Brunswick a real innovation sandbox. We've talked about being a living lab for a really long time, about being that sandbox. That sandbox element really does start with data and creating that linkable, interoperable, cross-sectoral data set that enables innovators to come in, take a look at what the problem is they're trying to solve, and test their solutions in real time without impact on the real world. That's a huge value proposition to any sector that we're talking about.
I'm just gonna summarize it to there will be a version of a healthcare data trust in the energy sector in Canada. Wouldn't it be cool if it was built here? So I think if you look at the other countries who've done this, Canada's gonna do this at some point, I believe. And I just think Atlantic Canada, New Brunswick, we're all primed to do this. Living lab, NBTEL kind of living lab concept. It's a great playground. It's a great place to do this. I think the opportunity's here.
I'd love your come from away perspective, Paul, from the eyes of somebody that's looking in rather than looking out.
I tried that. Ontario, I can access my own smart grid data, and it's terrible. It's a joke. It doesn't really do what it's advertised to do. And so I mentioned it to Greg in a prep call. And he's like, oh, well, actually, Ontario's ahead of the game. I'm like, oh, my God, that's so bad. That's so bad. The reality is we're starting from scratch. And so when you're starting from scratch, it's green fields. And when it's green fields, there's opportunity.
Are there any other questions from the floor here? Yes.
I got one more. You may have hit it earlier because I came in late. Did you guys talk about the St. John Data Center, the Spruce Lake one that's proposed?
No, we didn't touch on that
center?
specifically, no.
You familiar with it, the size of it? Greg, you must be. But it's proposed Spruce Lake, so it's 210 megawatt to 190 megawatt, but going through St. John Energy, it raises a lot of questions, I'd say, for St. John Energy and NB Power and kind of what gets built in the province. And I'm just interested to hear, there's lots of NIMBYism happening on it, but it's a massive project. 1,200 construction jobs, 210 jobs on an ongoing basis, so it has some concrete numbers to it. So I wouldn't mind hearing kind of your opinion on kind of where it fits, and probably follow up to what Danny was asking about data centers.
You're going to ask a political question from stage. I love this. This is great. This goes back to my point earlier about we should get the policy and the vision dealt with first, because this data center of this size with this kind of power needs, we've never had to deal with this before, and we don't have the policy structure. We haven't had the conversation. So what's going on now is we're having the conversation now, and it's not going pleasant for some, right? And it's going pleasant for others, but we should have had this conversation earlier and figured out what our policies and our guidelines and our rules were ahead of time. That's all.
I think social license is not something you build overnight, and so to your point, Greg, there is a bit of a need to have had an earlier conversation. I also think we need to be conscious of the fact that we're living in a time where precarity is sort of the motto. Nobody really knows what's coming in the future. Most people, somebody said, what happens when energy becomes unaffordable? Energy is unaffordable for like half the province. So lots of people are worried about, what does this mean for me? How will this impact my ability to heat my home in the winter and to cook my food? And what does this have to do with my life and how I can take care of my family? Again, coming back around, building social license takes time. We have to be able to demonstrate to people, one, why it's a good idea, two, what ultimately New Brunswick will get out of it, and as a result, what they will get out of it as an individual New Brunswicker when that time comes. And doing that sort of in a rushed fashion and trying to get on the exciting train of AI data centers, it can be really challenging. So I'm not a politician. I'm glad I'm not a politician, because that's not something I would want to have to answer to. But I would say that ultimately what we're talking about is the challenge of social license, and we have to remember that we only get social license in the context in which we are living. And right now we are living at a time where Canadians are really, really, really worried about putting food on their table. So asking me for permission about a data center is really uninteresting as a general everyday person.
I will just add one dimension to that, which is that importing all of our compute in Canada is just as dangerous for our sovereignty as if we imported all of our food or if we imported all of our electricity. That being said, there must be, like you said, social license. And social license is earned. And it comes from making sure these things, I mean, you've all seen the Amazon buildings all get built, those distribution centers. Now, they have not caused massive problems, at least not in Ottawa, that I know of. And the data centers won't be that much real estate. So it's really not that, right? It's about, do we have the grid capacity available to support that without causing poverty across the rest of society? Will the electricity consumption be clean? Will these things be incredibly noisy? Will they otherwise disrupt our neighborhoods? But if they were like those Amazon distribution centers, I don't think it would cause so much of a hullabaloo. But make no mistake, it is strategically important for Canada to have domestic compute capacity for the same exact underlying reasons that it's strategically important for Canada to grow enough calories to feed our nation and to have enough energy to feed our nation, to sustain our economy.
So we are rapidly coming to the end of our time here. I think what I'd like to do to close this out is maybe just go down the line for a very quick, maybe final thought, something, a parting message related to this, or anything germane to the conversation.
Well, I'm just happy to be here. Thanks for inviting me, everyone.
I think there's a massive opportunity in this, not just AI space, but everything that feeds it. What feeds AI is data, energy, and people, and that just means opportunity. And I think we should embrace it in a safe manner. And I think the opportunity's there.
I did say at the start that we'd get to a solution at some point, but I'm not sure that we did. I think we talked about some really good ideas, and I guess if I had something to leave everybody with is that ultimately the opportunity as it relates to energy data or just data writ large is for us to connect it and to work together and to look at how we understand that data from all of its angles. If we just look at a problem from one side, and that's why I was kind of picking at your, individual person owning data, I think it's an exceptional idea, and I think we just need to pick at that idea until we understand what the impact of that is across all of these different ways of thinking. And I've been reading this really good book it's called Invisible Women, and it's all about the gender data gap and how we just didn't take into account 50% of the population in a lot of the decisions that we made. But, one of the examples that I gave that really struck me was around transportation and the way that we design transportation infrastructure. So we're talking about, ultimately, generally, when we design a city, we're really looking to kind of create transportation infrastructure like roads and public transportation to get people into the downtown core and then out of the downtown core, right? You're going into work and then you're coming home from work. Women carry a disproportionate burden of caregiving responsibilities. And so actually their transportation models or data points are different. They don't actually go in and out. They go in, they go to the pharmacy, they drop the kid off at daycare, they go over to work. At lunchtime, they go to their doctor's appointment, and then they have to do all of that sort of coming back home. And as a result of that sort of design flaw, because we didn't look at the data from all of the different points that we might have and really understand the problem, women are disproportionately more living in poverty. This is a reality globally. More women live in poverty. That design flaw means that women are not just maybe having to get up earlier to go to work. They might be more often late to work. They may be less likely to work full time to account for those other responsibilities and the time they need to accomplish them, which sort of exacerbates that poverty gap, not to mention the pay equity gap that exists there as well. And then women living in poverty create lifelong health impacts, right? Women are more likely to live in poor health at the end of their lives. That has a massive burden on our healthcare system and ultimately a really large burden on our economy because we spend 50% of our GDP on health. So when we look at a problem from every single angle, when we take all of that data in, our energy data, our healthcare data, our transportation data, and every other piece, and we put it into one place and we say, here's our sandbox, let's really look at the problem we're trying to solve from every angle, I think that's the big opportunity here.
Yeah, I'll just end on that's the thing. Like if this whole room, like we all stay engaged and we keep asking the hard questions and we keep thinking, I'm thinking about your question there that you were asked a while ago. I'm pointing to you because I don't know your name. So, but yeah, this is stuff we have to think through. And if we keep staying engaged and we keep asking hard questions and we see what works and we do it mindfully, we do it human-centric, we practice the things we already know, I think we'll move forward. So.
All right, well, I'd like to say a big thank you to our panel this afternoon.
And if I may just step in for a moment, Chris, I know that there was some talk about wondering whether or not this panel would go the whole 90 minutes because there might not be enough material. I think it could go for even longer. So thank you very much for taking the reins and handling this. And as a token of our appreciation, we have some books for you called The Paradox of Progress, author Michael Karch. There you are.